Yeah.
Okay. You're listening to American Songcatcher. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Sierra Hull, mandolin, guitar, songwriter, singer extraordinaire. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. Energy level is, we have a 9-month old.
Oh gosh.
So energy levels are questionable in these times, and have been for 9 months. So
I
yes,
imagine.
I'm going through that. But I do drink coffee, which is something that is necessary.
I
So
hear you. I don't have a 9 month old, but I feel like I lean in on the coffee too to to get through sometimes.
I mean, you're busy enough where might seem like you have a child. You might just find that there's an easy transition for you if you decide to go that route. So
That's true. I haven't thought about it like that, that it could just be easy. I usually think,
maybe
oh
not.
Lord, it's going to be crazy, but I like that positive
Well,
thinking.
if your life is already crazy, yes, but it won't be easy. But it will be at least an easier transition into your time being consumed by something
Yeah.
so potently. Let's say that.
Yes.
Um, Thank you for taking time to talk with me today. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
What was your early childhood like, and does music run in your family?
It does. Yeah, I grew up in a little town in Tennessee called Byrdstown. I live in Nashville now, so Byrdstown's about 2 hours northeast of here, and
Mhm.
there's like 900 people, no red light, very small town in the boonies, kind of living, country living, and it was a great place to grow up. And in that part of the world, so many people, music is kind of a way of life. Like everybody kind of sings in church, and you hear music that way. Everybody from my granny to my great aunt, my mom. I remember hearing them sing church songs and church music. But it was really when I was about 8 years old and I got my first instrument, that I decided I wanted to really be a musician. So I'd always
Mhm.
kind of sang and knew that was, a part of my world. But my dad got really into bluegrass when I was, I think, probably about 7. He bought a mandolin and he had already been playing guitar a little bit because my great uncle who lived next door, my mom's uncle, played fiddle and mandolin and guitar a little bit and was just self-taught. He wasn't a professional musician by no means, and just played old tunes like Wildwood Flower and Arkansas Traveler on the mandolin, things like that. So I always heard the instruments, but it was
Mhm.
really my dad started trying to get my brother to learn to play guitar, and get him interested in bluegrass, and I was the annoying little sister who wanted to do everything he did. So yeah, I got a fiddle for Christmas, and it was just too big. It was a full size. My
Oh
granny
yeah.
and aunt and uncle went in together and got one for me. I'm sure at like a flea market or somewhere, and my arm just couldn't reach, all the way to the first position. So my dad, to kind of, I guess, saved my disappointment not being able to get started playing right away. He said, well, the mandolin's tuned like the fiddle. Why don't I show you a tune on here, and then we'll get you a smaller fiddle, soon enough. But for now, you can just at least know where to put your left hand. And so I learned my first tune on the mandolin and
Wow.
just fell in love with it. Started going to bluegrass jams with my dad, and we sort of got into it as a family kind of all together after that in a really exciting way.
Do you know if your parents or your lineage had any kind of music that was passed down through that came to you?
I don't know. I mean, funny enough, the uncle that I'm talking about was my mom's uncle by marriage. It was my granny's sister's husband. So my great aunt Betty was kind of like another grandma to me,
Hmm.
really. So as far as directly in my family, lineage, I'm not sure. There's not really any musicians that I know of per se, just people who kind of loved it and casually played in church and things like that,
Sure.
when I was a kid. But
I asked because that upbringing is very similar to what you would expect somebody to grow up in rural, like late 1800s, where the church was the first place for most people, even up until the early 1900s. And a lot of the musicians, like Hank Williams and all these folks that
yeah,
have inspired us, they learned from hymns in the church, and it was a
absolutely.
casual affair in their culture and locally, for people to just kind of trade songs or for people to play on the porches together and share space in the living room. But I'm curious, especially because you grew up in an area that is next to kind of the Mecca. As soon as you cross the Appalachian mountain range, you kind of enter into the mecca of all these immigrants and these people that came through here in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, and all the music that got infused. And so, my family is not from that area, so I'm always fascinated when people grow up near it. If there is some sort of lineage where it's like, yeah, well, my grandma learned this ballad from her great grandma, and or this and that. So I just felt like curious to ask you that.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel lucky, even though I can't probably point directly to just people in my family, but I do feel a real connection to, the people that, um, somebody like Bill Monroe starting this, bluegrass music, which is primarily what I grew up doing.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from Kentucky, just, I grew up right on the Kentucky line,
Mm-hmm.
and it definitely feels like even if my people weren't necessarily, musicians, I feel like the people of Appalachia like are my people, that kind of,
Yeah, of course.
at large, kind of where this music comes from. So it definitely, there's something really familiar just on a personal level when thinking about that kind of, music and country music and mountain music and
Mm-hmm.
bluegrass and all that really, yeah, I think just on a personal level, I feel a real connection to, as well as just the music itself.
That's amazing. So, did your parents play other styles of music in the house besides bluegrass music when your dad got into it?
Just as far as listening to it, you
Yeah,
mean?
listening just as far as like, records or whatever it is, radio.
Yeah, well, my parents are pretty young, and so like they loved '80s music.
Mm-hmm.
My mom's actually just turned 50 in a couple of weeks, so my parents are relatively young, and so they loved all the Journey, Air Supply, Def Leppard,
Mm-hmm.
Led Zeppelin, kind of stuff, and so. I know my dad would have been able to sing, when he was young, just like loving '80s rock and things like that. If you ever flip over to an '80s rock station, he can basically sing every song that comes on the radio. He loved that kind of music a lot. But I guess he always loved bluegrass as a kid too, and had always wanted a mandolin. And
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that for a long time, but that he had always wanted a mandolin. And my ancestors are all pretty poor people, really, growing up in rural Tennessee and these small towns. And so even my dad, when he was growing up, they just didn't have enough money to think about getting a mandolin. And so it was kind of a big deal, when he became an adult and saved up his money, his hard-earned money, and bought a mandolin, And so, um, yeah, I think they've always been very open to all kinds of styles of music. So that was definitely influential, knowing my dad loved that kind of music. And then,
Yeah.
again, just hearing music in church all the time. But really growing up in that area, like I had this conversation with some of my bandmates just the other day about how, depending on where you grew up and how you grew up, like I didn't really know anybody that would have played saxophone or anybody that would have played like classical music. It just wasn't, it wasn't as much of a thing. It wasn't like my school that was so tiny had a jazz band,
Mm-hmm.
or that there was really like a string band ensemble. There was a few like, marching band style thing, but it was like really small. And like the band director played trumpet and directed with the other hand. He played trumpet with one hand, directed with the other. It's really small town stuff.
Yeah, seriously.
So I think like it felt like a natural thing to get into acoustic music, because that's just kind of, that was sort of what was in the area. And then,
Mm-hmm.
as I got older and kind of left home, so to speak, and moved to Boston for a little while. And of course, being here in Nashville, there's a little bit of everything. But you travel and you kind of just get older, and you get kind of this exposure to all these different styles of music
Mm-hmm.
on a actual firsthand basis, rather than just hearing stuff on the radio. And I think it's different when you can actually see music. You can actually be in front of it and hear people play. For me, I knew some piano players that played just in church or whatever, but I never would have been around, people really playing other styles of music very much beyond bluegrass or country until I got a little older.
Yeah, especially being a musician. I mean, it doesn't really matter what instrument is being played because you know what kind of space musicians get into when they're in their kind of in their zone, in their groove. And I'm one of my favorite things of going to shows is I'm not the kind of person that enjoys talking to other people at shows. I'm very very much a center focus on somebody on stage and really trying to figure out what they're doing and how they're feeling into it. And that kind of observant mode it goes a long way being a musician myself, because I always get inspired by watching somebody else be passionate about what they're doing. But it
Yeah,
doesn't really matter what genre it is. I mean, obviously I'm not gonna find myself in a dubstep situation anytime soon, but like, it doesn't matter what other genres there are as far as the pioneer sounds go. There's always something that you can learn from other styles. So
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So you started playing when you were 8, you said, yeah?
Hmm.
What was your work ethic like at 8 years old?
Well, my dad was really obsessed with it all too. So, because he was so into it, we were kind of discovering all these new artists every week. It felt like there was a couple different jams actually that we could go to on the weekend on Fridays and Saturdays at these kind of old community centers where people would gather, and there'd be little jam circles happening, in the back, and usually a small stage where there might be, I don't know, 15 or 20 local people that might come and just grab a hamburger or a hot dog and listen to some bluegrass music on the weekend. So a little bit of a social scene. And so, you know, as far as work ethic goes, it was like there was so much to learn constantly, not just because I was having to push myself to sit down and practice. It's like I was kind of going to what would sort of be a learning practice session almost every weekend, going to these jams. And so it kind of started that way, of just kind of my dad showing me a couple things that he had learned. He didn't know a whole lot yet, he was
Hmm.
just kind of learning himself. So he taught me my first chords and a few songs and things like that. And then I started kind of tagging along with him to these jams and learning from the local players just through, them being so welcoming to me to invite me to, pull up a chair and jam, even if I didn't really know how. They were really encouraging, being like, okay, this one's in the key of A, and you just learn so much from being around it like that. And so,
Hmm.
but it didn't take me long to really know this is what I wanted to do with my life. I mean, pretty much from about 8 years old, I knew I wanted a career out of playing music, and we would get a new CD every week. And I kind of quickly realized, oh, people make records and they play shows and they tour, and that's a thing, and so I thought that's what I want to do. And so
Hmm.
my dad was always good about kind of keeping me on track for pushing me in a healthy way. If I ever got lazy, he'd be like, well, you've not been practicing very much. And my big dream was to get to play with Alison Krauss someday, and maybe get to play on the Grand Ole Opry. And so I would literally draw pictures of myself on stage at the Grand Ole Opry with Allison. It's like two birds in one stone. Why
Hmm.
not have them both happen? And my dad would say stuff, if I got lazy or whatever, wasn't practicing very much, he'd say, well, you've not been, working very hard on your playing. One of these days, Allison's going to call you to come play with her, and you're not going to be ready. So I'd go, oh gosh, okay, I better get to practicing. So, I loved it. So I naturally practiced a lot. But
Hmm.
if I ever had my little lazy spells, as we all can sometimes, my dad was always good at kind of pushing me along because he knew I wanted it,
Right.
because I really loved it.
That's crazy that you were visualizing that and that would come to fruition later in life. I mean, it's not crazy because visualizing is such a powerful thing for anybody that is involved in a career or passionate about something. Um, but also something you said about being there and learning from probably your early mentors, I would guess, the people that were at jams and stuff like that. And I was talking with David Holt last week about that, and he was saying that, in order for these traditions to continue, sure, there's so much information out there on the internet and websites and YouTube and all that good stuff, and you can learn plenty. But the advantages of having a mentor and somebody that you're looking at and learning from and getting the actual experience of seeing that person play right in front of you, and that, all the things that get wrapped up in that, you develop so much differently, and I think faster in a lot of ways, than you would if you were just kind of, letting your imagination run off YouTube videos or the internet. So I'm sure it
Absolutely, yeah,
seemed like a lot of people probably were early mentors for you in that kind of light.
totally. And I think it's one of the beautiful things about just growing up in sort of a genre of music and a community that really has that,
Hmm.
not every style of music necessarily has that sort of thing where it's kind of small and it's like, there's a group of people that everybody learns by ear
Right.
and
It's
and
community
everybody,
centric.
yeah, everybody learns by showing somebody else something and sharing. And
Right.
so there's that really welcoming spirit to it all. And I think that made me want to do it as much as the music itself. There was something really fun about being able to see the same people just about every weekend. And I was just a little kid, and in some cases the only female, for the longest time, as just a young little girl at these bluegrass jams, usually me and, a bunch of older dudes. But they couldn't have been nicer to me. They were really welcome and encouraging, and never once made me feel like the kid or made me
Hmm.
feel like, the only female. It was always, kind of very welcoming and sharing and all that. And I'm really fortunate that it worked out that way,
Yeah,
because it really
absolutely.
made me want to be better and helped me grow so much.
Yeah, I think other communities that are in a lot of other genres are so much more competitive in the sense of, there's not many folk music jams that I've been to. I mean, you can sing folk songs with other people, and that's kind of, I think, the extent of it, or, being able to jam with one other person. But a lot of other genres don't lend itself so much to community and so much. And there's a big part of that, I think, is from tradition and the fact that these instruments, they represent something that is a lot older than what's happening currently. And modern music, I think, has a different form of jamming with collaborations and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
um, so it did it happened. You got on stage with Alison Krauss. How did it happen?
Well, so I was fortunate. I got to play the Grand Ole Opry first before I actually got to meet Allison. So like half that dream did come true. And looking back now as an adult, I kind of realize it only took a couple years for that to actually happen. Which when you're the kid though, it feels kind of like a lifetime. It felt like I'd
Sure.
been kind of manifesting that dream for a long time. Um, but my brother and I got to open a show for Grand Ole Opry member Mike Snyder, who's a
Hmm.
banjo player, comedian, and has been responsible for getting a lot of young people on the Opry for the first time. He's just really great. And we opened a show for him, and he said, "Oh, the next time you see these kids on stage, they'll be with me at the Grand Ole Opry," and that was kind of his way of inviting. So I got to do that with my brother, which was awesome. But I still always had this dream of getting to play with Allison. She was just the biggest of heroes to me. I
Hmm.
just absolutely adored her. Um, as much as a kid could adore anyone. And so I met her very briefly backstage at Merle Fest. We had never been to a festival that was very big. I mean, growing up in such a small area, even the towns next to Byrdstown, which were slightly bigger, still had festivals that, if there was 400 or 500 people, that's a lot,
Hmm.
at these festivals. And so one of the local musicians that talking about these circle jams and stuff, there was a guy named Lowell Logan who was just a mentor of sorts to me, a great fiddle player in the area, and he would always bring his copy of Bluegrass Unlimited magazine over to my house like every month, which was so awesome. And so he uh, he would drive it over, and I was such an Allison fan. I would always flip through the pages, just such a nerd, and just search for her name in there anywhere. And so if there was like a festival advertisement, I saw it. I was like, "There's Allison." And so one day my dad, I'd already looked through the magazine. He was kind of flipping through it, and he said, "Hey, look at this!" And I saw Allison Krauss and Union Station listed at Merle Fest, this kind of legendary acoustic music festival
Hmm.
in North Carolina. And I was like, "Yeah, I saw that." And he said, "Do you want to go?" And I was like, really? I'm 10 years old, and I'd never been to a festival. Like, people, my heroes didn't really come close to our area. Like, Nashville wasn't that far away, but we didn't really come to Nashville. Nashville, a 2 hour trip when you kind of live in the boonies, at least back then, really, it didn't feel like something we would do very much. And so we went to this festival, and I think didn't really know what to expect, but we get there, and there's like 150,000 people. It's
Yeah.
huge. And I remember going to it thinking, I'm going to get a meter. I'm totally going to get a meter because she's playing, like. just
She's
like
on the
any of the
lineup.
other small festivals I had been to, anybody finished playing and you could walk right up to them and say hello, the local festivals. And so I remember we got there and my mom said, now, honey, like, this is a really big festival. And I think it became clear she wasn't going to come out and sign autographs or whatever. This just wasn't that kind of thing. There's way too many people. But in my mind, it was going to happen. And so my mom's like, well, you may not get to meet her, but you'll at least get to hear her play live, and it's going to be great. And one of these days you'll get to meet her if you don't get to meet her here. So I remember saying, oh, just please pray I get to meet her, because I just wanted to so bad. And so fast forward the next day, this was like right after the first Nickel Creek record that Allison produced had come out. So of course, naturally, I was a big Chris Thile fan, and he had played one of the smaller side stages with another one of my mandolin heroes, a guy named Mike Marshall. So I got to go up, and Chris signed my Girl Power mandolin strap, and which I still have.
Love
that.
And
and funny enough, like, I had been jamming the night before, and I go off and I wait in line, get my signature, and then I'm like walking toward whatever the next thing is, and this guy stops me. And he says, hey, are you that little girl I saw jamming, playing the mandolin last night? I guess I'd been jamming with, somewhere on the campground or whatever. And he said, I was telling my daughter about you, and she's here with me now. Would you play her a tune? Because I just really want her to hear you play. So I was like, okay. And I don't know, my dad probably knew what he was doing. We were a pretty good ways from where Chris was. Like, he wouldn't have heard me play this. But my dad's like, well, how about you try to play that Ode to a Butterfly, which was the opening track off of the first Nickel Creek album. It was an instrumental. And so I was like, well, okay. And so I gave it my best shot playing Ode to a Butterfly. And, when a little kid plays, naturally there's a crowd that kind of forms. It's just one of those things,
Yeah.
And so a few people are kind of around, they're watching, and somebody realizes I'm playing Chris's tune, and they like run all the way over to that other stage and say, Chris, you've got to come over here. There's this girl playing your tune. And by the time I finish, I was like knelt down, kind of on the ground. I don't know why I guess he had just signed my strap, so my strap wasn't on my mandolin. That's why. And so I was kind of like knelt down playing on the ground, so I didn't really even quite notice all these people that had, were around. And I look up, and there's Chris right in front of me, and he says, holy crap, want to play it together? And I was like, yeah, and so we went and found this quiet little corner at the festival, and he jammed with me for 2 hours. It was just the most amazing thing, one of my heroes doing that. And so he took me backstage to meet Allison.
Holy cow.
And so I got to meet her, and it was just the most beautiful thing to have one hero like that get to introduce me to, my hero of heroes, Allison. And I didn't get to play for her. I mean, I didn't hardly get to talk to her much. It was just like, I got a photo, went on my way. I was on cloud nine. That was all I wanted. And then fast forward a few months, I'm at IBMA, which is kind of the big bluegrass music convention that happens every year. And I was invited to play as part of a thing called Kids on Bluegrass. So we had went, at the time it was in Louisville, Kentucky. And in walks Ron Block, who's been a member of Alison Krauss's band for years. And of course, I was just a fan of the whole band. So I was like, Ron Block, And so I went and met Ron, and he was nice enough to jam, play a tune with me. And he just could not have been nicer. He hung out with me and my brother, my mom and dad for hours that day and just jammed with us. And I had just made a little CD of traditional fiddle tunes, on the mandolin. And, had only been playing a couple years, but just, that was like the recent thing I had just done, my first CD, and so we gave Ron a CD, and he had me autograph one to my hero, Alison Krauss. And what happened beyond that, I don't really know still to this day how it all happened. I don't know if he just went and gave her this CD and was like, look, this girl is obsessed with your music or what, or like she loves our band. But somehow he gave that CD to Allison, got our phone number, and the next thing I know, she calls my house at my mom and dad's and invites me to come play the Grand Ole Opry. So it was just the wildest the wildest thing, you know, and I just turned 11. It's like what a dream come true, and that it all kind of happened so fast, but would have felt like, you know, this eternity of like worshiping these people and kind of wondering what they're like and hoping to
Mm-hmm.
meet them someday, you know. It's
And
pretty
that
amazing.
guy who wanted you to play for his daughter, I mean, I don't know
I
if things
know.
have happened the way they happened without that guy.
I know.
That's
Absolutely.
crazy. What a wild story. I'm glad I asked that question. So who else were some of the pioneering bluegrass musicians that stood out most in your early development?
Well, one of the biggest for me was Tony Rice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just not just as a guitar player. I started playing guitar about a year after mandolin, and of course, like I've sat down and tried to learn my fair share of Tony Rice licks on the guitar, but I just loved his albums so much. I loved his
Mm-hmm.
singing. I loved his song choices. So he was like one of my biggest heroes. You know, of course, I mentioned Nickel Creek. You know, Allison produced that first Nickel Creek record that came out on Sugar Hill, and you know, they became big influences. There were also bluegrass bands like Blue Highway or Third Time Out, Doyle Lawson and Quicksilver. You know,
Mm-hmm.
mandolin players like Sam Bush, David Grisman. You know, I mean, gosh, the list could really go on and on and on. But those were definitely some of, you know, the biggest influences. And of course, a guy named Adam Steffi played mandolin in Allison's band in Union Station, and you know, I don't even know what I would sound like if it weren't for a player like him, because you know he was so influential to me as a
Mm-hmm.
player. So yeah, the list is long. You can
That's
keep going,
fantastic,
but
though. I mean, it's an eclectic group too. I mean, even though you're still in the vein of bluegrass music, there's so many different avenues you can go down with those people.
for sure.
Um, so, would you like to play a song from maybe one of these artists, or one of their songs, or a style that inspired or
Sure,
changed you?
sure. Well, you know, we're talking about Tony. Maybe I'll play a
Yeah,
Tony song.
absolutely. I would love
Yeah.
that. Would you be able to tilt your computer down slightly so I can see the
Oh yeah.
fretboard
Sure.
and you?
Can scoot back a little here.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
um, yeah, so one of the first albums the first Tony album I ever got was an album called Church Street Blues, which the whole
Hmm.
album, you know that record?
I love that record.
Oh,
That's,
it's still to this day one of my all-time favorite projects ever made, and
mm-hmm,
it's just his guitar and voice, you know, and
mm-hmm.
it's just a beautiful, beautiful album from start to finish. And so that was my introduction to Tony, and you know, still remains one of my favorites. So this is a Norman Blake song,
Ah, yes.
but I'll do my tribute to Tony's version of it. I've been hanging out of town, Lord, and I low down rain. Watching good time, Charlie Friends is driving me insane. Up on shady Charlotte Street, Lord, the green lights look red. I wish I was back home on the farm, Lord, in my feather bed. And I got myself a rocking chair to see if I could lose these stand down hard times alone Church Street blues. Held myself at the Church Street Blues. Some guitar strings, oh, like diamond brand. String up this old Martin box and roll and join some band. But I guess I'm gonna stay right here and I can sing a while. Try to make me a little change and give you folks a smile. And I got myself a rocking chair to see if I can lose these stand down hard times on Church Street Blues. Myself a rocking chair to see if I can lose these stand down hard times on Church Street Blues.
Gorgeous. Tony would be proud.
Oh man, thanks.
So fun fact, I actually live in Rising Fawn where Norman Blake lives. I haven't gotten to meet him yet.
Oh, that's cool.
It is cool. I'm hoping somehow that it will happen. I keep running, I play obviously too, but I keep running into people that are like, oh, well, this guy plays with Norman, so you should, get in touch with him. And so it's going to happen at some point as things keep opening up. But
I would love to see them again. It's been so many years. When I was 12 years old, part of like the Allison connection, she opened so many doors for me as a young person, and even still is just such a great friend and mentor, that I can call up. But she invited my brother and I, well, actually, I guess she told T-Bone Burnett about me and my brother, who had produced all the music for the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did a tour around the Oh Brother movie called Down from the Mountain. And then after the Cold Mountain soundtrack happened, which Allison and a lot of other musicians were involved in, I wasn't involved in either one, but they did another tour that they called the Great High Mountain Tour. And she told T-Bone about my brother and I, and when this tour was getting put together, he invited me and my brother to come be part of this tour. And so it was just, we got to travel with Allison on her bus, and go to all these cities for about 2 months and play, and it was just unreal. And Norman and Nancy were on that tour.
Oh, my.
And so we got to hang out with them, for a couple months, just on this really amazing tour with Allison and Ralph Stanley and the Nashville Bluegrass Band, the Whites and the Cox family, and just like all these amazing artists. And I remember just loving getting to hang out with Norman and Nancy. But I've probably not seen them since I was about 12 years old, after getting to spend all this time with them on this tour. So yeah, I'd love to get to see them again.
Well, rumor has it that they, because of the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou soundtrack, which Gillian talked to T-Bone and convinced him, if you're going to do an old time, you need to talk with Norman Blake. He's your guy. And him and Nancy were able to stop touring so much because of that. It allowed them the ability to kind of just settle down for a minute. Yeah. But they do, apparently they are still playing with local folks and are planning to do some small things here and there. So
that's awesome.
It would be really cool to see you guys together. And see
I love that.
The reconnection of, man, how many years would that have been? Like 16 years? How old are you?
29 now. So
yeah, 17 years. Oh my goodness.
I know. It's crazy.
So obviously you've been heavily inspired by bluegrass, gospel music. What other genres are next in line that have shaped you as a musician?
I kind of listen to everything these days. I'm really like all over the map. Like I had to go out and get my emissions test this morning on my vehicle, and I was jamming out to Elton John,
Love that.
It's definitely all over the map. I mean, gosh, there's a lot of pop music I actually like, and things on the radio. I'm a big Beyonce fan. I've seen her in concert a couple times. It's amazing, and felt heavily inspired by the Lemonade album, even though it's so completely different than anything I do. But bands like Coldplay, I listen to a lot of different things. I love Dolly and
Hmm.
Joni Mitchell and Paul
Yeah.
Simon, and like from a songwriter, how can you not be inspired as a songwriter, not be inspired by, that kind of crew and caliber of folks,
Hmm.
and then occasionally, we'll kind of venture into jazz and listen to things like people like Herbie Hancock and
Hmm.
Wayne Shorter, and I am really kind of a bluegrass gal at heart because that's what I started with, and that's sort of everything that my foundation was laid upon,
Hmm.
But I think it's important, if you're interested in trying to grow as a musician, to kind of keep your eyes and ears open and learn as much as you can from all forms of music. And
Hmm.
for me, I just happen to really love and enjoy a lot of different kinds of music, and they kind of ultimately kind of work their way into the music I'm making, even if
Hmm.
sometimes in a small way.
Yeah. It's crazy. You literally almost verbatim said a line that Tony said when people were asking him about kind of the experimentation with the pizza tapes and his relationship with David Grisman. This podcast isn't just interviews. Most of them are kind of audiobooks where
Oh,
it goes
cool.
through a series. Like the first song, there's always 5 songs. The first is always a traditional song, how it got here, the long journey, and kind of all the different iterations that happen on the way. And then I go through on a timeline to different artists in different genres that are kind of all American roots based. So Tony was in, I think, episode 8. And it requires a deep dive. Like each artist is like 20 or 30 minutes of finding
Cool.
and talking about their story. But he did say almost verbatim that exact line of, I'm a bluegrass person at heart, but essentially I can't help but love all these sounds. I can't help but love Gordon Lightfoot. And it was kind of a
Yeah.
response to people questioning why he was putting a song like the record the old 97, or like the record the Edmund Fitzgerald, I think, was the tune that he put on Church Street Blues.
Churchy blues. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And people were kind of curious of like, what's going on with Tony. So it's interesting that you just kind of echoed something there.
That's so funny.
Yeah. So I asked that about different styles because it seems like, in looking at your catalog of songs that you've released and recordings, it seems like there's a diverse range recently, especially more experimentation. Um, and I'm curious of how you've managed to still ring in traditional sounds and then kind of evolve that. I mean, traditional music in itself is a constant evolution, of course, but it's just interesting to hear such experimentation on those sounds, but it never really strays from sounding traditionally based, if that makes sense. And I'm curious how your process has been for that.
Um, well, I think a lot of it has just been through just trying to not put too many boxes, try to not put myself in too many boxes, as I've gotten older, and just kind of trying to chase what feels honest as a musician, I guess. Like, what's the thing that feels like if I go to write something that really feels like I'm kind of sounding or saying what I would naturally want to sing about, or the way I would want a melody to go, as opposed to feeling like I need it to be some bluegrass thing, or I need it
Mm-hmm.
to be some, very not bluegrass thing, and instead trying to lean upon the fact, I mean, I'm primarily a mandolin player, so I mean, you don't really hear mandolin in a lot of pop music, or, it is kind of an acoustic music first and foremost, even more so than guitar. Like, you hear
Definitely.
guitar on everything, but mandolin. So I think when mandolin is kind of the, focus instrument in some cases of say, something I've written, even if you surround it with non-traditional instruments, there's still that traditional element because
Sure.
the instrument itself kind of carries that. So yeah, I think it's just been more through just trying to experiment and try things and sort of just see what comes out, and chase it in that way.
Yeah. Well, it's coming through authentically, I can say, and I consider myself a stickler with music, but it's coming through
Oh, thanks.
in a way that is very authentic. And I'm just curious about that process. So are you still diving into music history to influence new songs? Or is there any lesser known integral artists that you've discovered recently?
Oh gosh. I'm always, digging around on Spotify or whatever and trying
Hmm.
to find new people. But usually I feel like I end up kind of going backwards and finding old stuff that I've not spent any time with. I probably have done that more, in recent times. Like, even talking about Elton John, of course, every all of his stuff that's been on the radio or the big hits, but like I've kind of just been interested. There's a lot of songs that aren't just super popular songs that are also really cool, of
Hmm.
his. So kind of like trying to take artists that I know I've liked what they've done, but haven't really spent time with their music. I've been doing that a lot over the last few months. Really, just kind of almost going backwards and trying to do a bit more of a deep dive. But yeah, I mean, I'll definitely occasionally stumble upon something that somebody I've never heard before, and
Hmm.
really, really get into it for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bottomless well when you go backwards. And I mean, it can be a bottomless well for the most part going forward and in present day too. But I just, through this podcast, every single time I research an artist to do a story, there are so many strings attached to that artist that an amazing underrepresented repressed people that got just essentially couldn't record for whatever reason. They couldn't afford recording, or they didn't, circumstances happened around their life where they weren't able to. And there's so much amazing music out there that is tied to all the people, the legends that we grew up with, or people that you get
Totally.
inspired by.
I
So
think like you
curious about
talking
that.
about things being almost like a little audiobook of sorts or whatever,
Hmm.
and I do a lot. I listen to a lot of audiobooks just when I'm like cleaning house or driving around or whatever. I
Yeah.
love that. Like sometimes that's as inspiring to me as actually listening to music is.
Hmm.
And I did a session with this great bass player that plays a lot on people's stuff here in Nashville named Mike Bubb, and he was telling me about. He mentioned the Tammy Wynette book, and for some reason, that's so I decided to listen to her audiobook, and just kind of got this tragic life story, and
Hmm.
it's I just got like so sucked into it. And of course I know who Tammy Wynette is, and like thinking about country music and growing up where I did and all that stuff, but I'd never really totally done a deep dive into sort of some of that kind of country music. I mean, I love people like Merle Haggard and had heard George Jones, and actually got to open a show for George Jones one time, which was really wild as a teenager. But yeah, I had never really given Tammy's music much much time. And then like you read the book, and then you want to know, like you feel like
Hmm.
you kind of know something about this person, and then you like want to hear what their music sounds like after
Yeah.
kind of knowing a little bit about their life. And so then that led me to like, okay, well now I'm going to listen to the George Jones audiobook. And then I got kind of like listened to George Jones for a while. And then I just finished Brandy Carlisle's book, and of
Mm.
course, like she sings a little bit, and she did Honky Cat, Elton John. I think that's what kind of led me on the Elton John kick, and was like, this is so good, I want to like dig into that further. And did a writing session with Rodney Crowell recently, and he
Mm.
gave me his audiobook, which is really great. And so I've been like kind of digging into his music, and that's kind of been a fun way to do it, which sounds kind of like
Well,
I need to listen to your podcast more.
you probably should. I mean, you would. That's the thing. I think that's been my favorite part is, and from hearing their feedback from other people is, their stories are so much. They're vital to understanding their music, and it's
Yeah,
this
absolutely.
entirely other level of depth that you get when you hear these, whether it's tragic tales, whether it's tales of adversity, or whether it's, songs about, perseverance or whatever it is, or stories of perseverance. I mean, you really get a completely different sense of the songs
Yeah.
afterwards. And also, like, to your what you said earlier, you listen to other stuff that maybe wasn't as commercialized or wasn't as popularized, and you get a way better sense of who they are. And it's been my favorite part of this show, to get a better understanding of the music on top of their stories. And I love stories. I'm a storyteller at heart. I will always love stories and follow them. But this is like, that's the part that I love the most. It's just the depth that you get. So I would say, yes, you should listen to my podcast.
Yeah.
Would you? We only have about
I will, for
10
sure,
more minutes or
because I love
so.
podcasts too.
Oh, good. Do you want to play another song that solidified your love for traditional music, or for a certain artist, or anything inspiration-wise?
Sure. Well, yeah, I've still got the guitar, so I'll play another one on here. This song, you know, as a guitar player, it's hard not to also be influenced by Doc Watson,
Mm.
and all that he kind of did for flat pickers. But I also, similar to like talking about Tony, I just love Doc singing so much. His singing made me love him as an artist as much or more than his guitar playing. So this song I used to cover some as a kid. It was one of the early Doc songs I fell in love with. And hadn't thought about it in years, really, until this past year. I decided to kind of work it up. It's one of his called Walk On Boy. Walk on down the road. There ain't nobody in this whole wide world that's gonna help you carry your load. I left my mama and papa just about the age of 10. Lord, I got me a job working on the levee, told them water for the hard working men. Walk on, boy. Walk on down the road. There ain't nobody in this whole wide world that's gonna help you carry your load. One day my papa told me some advice I'd like to give to you. Some find a good woman, be good to her, and she's gonna be good to you. Walk on, boy. Walk on down the road. There ain't nobody in this whole wide world that's gonna help you carry your load. Now should anybody ever rescue, who's that boy named Brown? You can tell him he's the man who left his hammer smoking when he beat that steam drill down. Walk on, boy. Walk on down the road. There ain't nobody in this whole wide world that's gonna help you carry your load. There ain't nobody in this whole wide world that's gonna help you carry your load. So walk on, boy. Just walk on, boy.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Doc is in episode 4. If you want to revisit that. Norman Blake is in
All
episode
right.
2. I'm just going to tell you that. I'm going to keep
Man,
plugging away at my own show while
we
we're
got all
on my
these
show.
ties.
Really, really well done.
Oh man, thanks.
You're welcome. So, got a couple more minutes. This podcast aims to bridge the gap for people that otherwise might not be exposed to old music. And I always ask this in interviews. If you had to pick one musician as a gateway to the music of the past, who would it be and why? And this could be in bluegrass, this could be in blues, folk, country, whatever you want.
Um, are you talking about that's sort of current that but also can bridge the gap between now and then?
Somebody that is, it doesn't have to be somebody that's alive today or somebody that's modern. It's more of somebody that is like a gateway drug, you could call it, to where
Well,
you kind of
I'll
transition in easily.
yeah, I'll be honest. I think, my hero Alison Krauss is sort of the perfect recipe for that because, her heroes were all people like Tony Rice and J.D. Crowe and Ricky
Hmm.
Skaggs and all these, folks that if you listen to her music, which definitely has a smoother, more modern, welcoming um, hand in some ways to someone that doesn't know anything about the traditional side of music. She's certainly been someone that's brought a lot of people to become fans of traditional artists too,
Hmm.
because she has such a love for it. She's also, you know, had elements of the traditional music in her music, but has also been such a collaborator in sort of modern culture and modern music. And so I think she's a great person for that.
I agree entirely. Are you aware of, I'm sure you're, obviously you go and meet a lot of people when you tour around and play different shows. Who's an artist today that's keeping true American roots music alive? And again, this can be any kind of genre that you've seen. Somebody that is really holding true to tradition that you admire. I'm sure there's
I,
many.
there are many. Oh gosh. Well, one of the first that popped in my head is Rhiannon Giddens.
Hmm.
She's somebody that when you think about the history of music, she does a lot to really keep the history of, old time music, especially, banjo music, things like that, like in the forefront and not just the music itself, but the history and story behind it.
Hmm.
In the more traditional bluegrass world, which is kind of what I started with, there's a band called High Fidelity that I think is really great. And, they, like, if you hear them play, they're totally like my peers, but they sound like a band that could have been around, 40 years ago. And I think that's kind of cool that they still honor the older music and do it really well.
Hmm. Okay. There's some people for you to listen to. Anybody that's listening to this. Um, do you have anything that you are up to lately that you want to talk about? A shameless plug, if you will.
Well, I'm just, folks can find me on social media and kind of keep up. I try to, keep myself busy and involved in lots of different things. So I'm always writing a lot and kind of planning and working on a new project right now and hope to have some new music out later this year, fingers crossed. But, I'm excited to be going back on tour. This past weekend, I did my first full band shows. My husband Justin and I play as a duo sometimes. He's an
Hmm.
incredible musician, and we do some duo shows along the way. But I just played my first full band shows in 14 months this past weekend,
Awesome.
and it felt amazing. So
I'm sure.
if everything goes accordingly, like from about September through December, I'm going to be incredibly busy. So I'll be
Okay.
out there on the road playing, and folks can kind of keep up with all that through social media or my website, sierrahole.com. I'll let folks know kind of what's going on as that
I'll
all gets
also
announced.
I'll also add that people should follow your YouTube because it's both instructional and also really really well done. You do a lot of really cool things on there.
Thank
So
you. I
follow Sierra
appreciate that.
Hole on YouTube. Last question: do you have a message that you want to send out regarding the deep changes going on in the world?
Oh man, I just think it's so important now. Like, there's so much division that if we can just, there's so much we all have to learn. And I think listening to our fellow people can be the best thing we can do is just try to, not think that we've got it all figured out. Because I know
Mm-hmm.
from experience, just growing up where I did, I grew up in an area where everybody kind of sounds the same. You know, the accents are the same, the beliefs are pretty much all the same, everybody kind of looks the same, and it's a beautiful way to grow up. You know, it's like lots of wonderful people, and I'm grateful for that experience. But then you kind of leave that and you see, well, there's plenty of people that are just coming to find their place in the world from a completely different place. And you know, like trying to understand that we're not as different as we might think we are. And I think at the end of the day, we're all just trying to find our kind of happiness and place in life. And the best thing we can do is just, I mean, it sounds so cliche, but just like be kind to one another, and have, you know, have some compassion for your fellow person, and realize, you know, you don't really know what they're going through or what has informed their thinking, you know what I mean? And so, you know, we've all got a lot of growing to do, I think. And so, you know, I don't know if that's as much advice as just like my hope for myself is just to kind of continue to be open to my position and my thinking, and like knowing that I've still got so much to learn about how to just be a better person in the world, and how to, you know, uplift people around me, and try not to be so selfish, because we all can be at times.
I think
get caught up in our own world.
That's a beautiful sentiment. I think everybody trying to find their own happiness, and, you know, everybody's fighting battles we know nothing, you know, each person doesn't know anything about. That's something to hold on to. Thank you so much for taking time. I know you have to run to another interview. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, and I can't wait to check out some more episodes of your podcast now.
Sounds great. We'll be in touch, I'm sure, but enjoy yourself, and good luck with the rest of the recording and all that good stuff. And we'll talk soon.
I so appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right.